भारत कीर्ति सीरीज।
Namaskar. Welcome back to Maurya-lok, to the Janpad of the Maurya-lok, which we have been exploring for a very long time. But then it is the land and the people, and it needs in-depth exploration. I am coming to the end of it. So, how do I end? How do I play out this last chance that I have to show you the lives of the people of Maurya-lok? There is a lot left still to be explored. So, for these last bits of the Janpad, I am going to take inspiration from the degustation platter of the French or the smorgasbord of the Scandinavians and give you a little taste of a number of things, multiple little tastes, so that whichever one you like, you can go ahead with and learn more about it. We will touch on things like language and literature. We will touch on the fine arts, on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So you see, there is quite a platter in front of you. I am going to start with language and literature. We may not be able to finish it in one episode. So perhaps you may look forward to more than one episode of this degustation platter. I want to first give you a little bit of a background to the way in which the different terminologies of Indic epistemology and Western epistemology will interact and draw meaning from each other. Today, we are used to a description of subjects, of understanding everything through Western categories. However, Indic knowledge systems have a very sophisticated epistemology and have a very sophisticated categorization of knowledge systems and subjects. They are not done in the same way as we are used to now. There may not even be a hard division between the hard sciences, between the cognitive sciences, between the arts. So what I will try to do is to have a conversation between the two, to show you the Indic epistemological system, and then to show you how our current subjects, the way we understand them today, have their origins and a description of their tenets inside the categories of the Indic knowledge system. So let us start with language and literature. That is part one. Language, of course, is the first basic concomitant of any knowledge system. It is no secret that we belong to an oral civilization. So the origins of all these things are in the hoary past. It is very difficult for us to be able to pin exact dates on it. We have a language and script system of the Indus Valley civilization or the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, but that has not been perfectly deciphered as yet. A great deal of work has been done, and hopefully it shall be completed in a very few years. The Mauryan period provides an anchor date for language as well as script because of the extensive inscriptions that have been found. Ashokan inscriptions on pillars, Ashokan inscriptions on rock faces, and these have been found scattered across the subcontinent. So these provide a kind of anchor date. We can analyze these inscriptions and arrive at the number and variety of languages and dialects which was present at the time. We can also look at what the texts and compositions say about different languages which were prevalent in the subcontinent. For example, the Natya Shastra has a lot to say on this. It is a good thing that a textual analysis and an analysis of the inscriptions brings us to broadly similar categorizations. So what was that? In the subcontinent, there were a certain number of Prakrit languages which were prevalent, and there was Sanskrit and there was Tamil. So you had 4 Prakrits. That was the Udich in the northern part of the country, Prachya in the eastern part of the country, Madhya Deshiya in the central part of the country, And then you had the Dakshinatya Prakrits in the southern part of the country. The Madhya Deshiya was very, very strongly connected with Sanskrit. It was also very, very strongly connected with all the other three Prakrits. The Dakshinatya had a special connection with Tamil, and Sanskrit and Tamil also borrowed from each other and spoke to each other. I should remind you at this juncture that this is a bird's eye view. This is a large view, a macro view, which does not take into account the micro details. So there were also many other dialects and many other sub-dialects which were prevalent. One sees reflections of these in the inscriptions, and one sees reflections of these in the different compositions of that period. And it is to these dialects and sub-dialects that we can trace the origins of all the languages that we speak today in the Indian subcontinent, barring English, of course. So you have the Shahbaz Gadi and the Kalsi inscription from where we can trace Hindi. The same can be said of Tamil or Marathi or Punjabi. So this is in effect a motherlode of information about the origins of the different languages that we speak today. At that time, Panini was the one who organized and standardized the grammar of Sanskrit. It is also said that the grammar of Tamil, the Akatyam and the Tolkappiyam, were also standardized at this time. This was the time of the third Sangam, remember, and the third Sangam is dated to around the modern period. So this was as far as the languages are concerned, the Prakrit, Sanskrit and Tamil. Now I have been speaking about inscriptions, so you can guess that the answer to the question, was there writing in India during the Mauryan period, is yes, of course there was, because there were so many inscriptions which obviously people wrote down and other people read. These inscriptions were written in two scripts. I will take the less important one first, that is Kharoshthi. This Kharoshthi script is said to have perhaps come from Aramaic. It is written from right to left, and it was used for writing the Sanskrit and Prakrit of the northwest. It spread also to Central Asia. It was in existence till about the 3rd century of the Common Era, but today it has completely died out. And now for Brahmi. Brahmi is the mother of hundreds of scripts of Asia, especially of South, Southeast and East Asia. It is absolutely the mother script. And it is a very intriguing thought that some very, very rigorous and deep research is being done into the links between Brahmi and the script of the Harappan or Saraswati Sindhu civilization. And it appears, it seems, that Brahmi may have some relation to the Harappan script. So you see how far back all these things can go. I will be speaking more on the subject of Brahmi numerals, but let me tell you over here that Brahmi numerals are the origin and the precursor of the numerals that we use today. Take a look at this. These are the Brahmi numerals in the middle line, and some numerals which evolved from that, which have been found in Gwalior a few centuries later. And on top you have the numerals as we use them today. Can you see the striking similarities? So Brahmi has been and is important for us in the search for origins in more ways than one. Before I go on, a word on the relationship between Prakrit and Sanskrit, because this has been distorted beyond recognition by many Indologists and many people who have not perhaps bothered to read Sanskrit and Prakrit together. So during the Mauryan period, it is said that this was the high noon of Prakrit, because all of Ashokan inscriptions were written in Prakrit. So if the thesis that Prakrit and Sanskrit were opposed to each other and one developed only in opposition to the other, if this thesis were true, we would have expected Sanskrit to have been in a very poor situation as far as the modern period was concerned. Nothing could be further from the truth. And the truth is that Sanskrit and Prakrit went hand in hand. Sanskrit was the language of certain formal subjects. It was more standardized. It had a grammar which was set down. Prakrit was popular. Prakrit was that which was spoken by everyone. It was used by everyone. Perhaps it did not bother to set down and write a grammar for itself. That did not detract either from its popularity or its prestige or its utility. So Sanskrit and Prakrit walked in hand, and don't forget this very important fact. Now, if there was writing and if people wrote, what did they write on? They obviously wrote on cloth, cotton as well as silk, and Nearchus, one of the commanders of Alexander's army, has mentioned both writing and writing on cloth. Other than cloth, there was birch bark, there were other kind of barks, then there were leaves, then there was wood, and there was stone. They also wrote on metal, and an exquisite little copper inscription has been found at Sohagora, which tells us of the technique of writing on metal with a sharpened stylus. There is also at Piprava a stone vase has been found with some Brahmi numerals carved on it. So they wrote by scratching with a stylus, and after preparing the surface, of course. They also wrote with chalk, and they also wrote with ink. Ink was called masi. The writings which were done on bark or leaves or cloth were also bound up into pothis or books. And these books were tied up with a thread which is called a sutra. So now you know the origin of the word sutra in so much of our Indic language systems, this sutra and that sutra. Why sutra? Because thread was used to tie up these pothis. That is a little bit of an introduction to the languages of that time and the writing of that time, the scripts of the time. Now let us go on to literature. We will move on to a consideration of the literature of the time, but this poses a bit of a tricky question, because literature of the time was not exactly the literature that we think of as we understand it today. That literature was the source and the fountainhead of all arts, sciences, cognitive sciences, everything. Because it was not categorized the way we categorize it today, that this is a physics test and a text and this is a dramaturgy text, etc. Everything was found in the literature, so to speak, of that period. However, there was a categorization which was done according to Indic systems of thinking. So there were the Chaturdash Vidyasthans, which means the 14 seats of learning. There were also the 64 kalas or the Chatushashti kala. So very roughly speaking, we can say that most of the sciences got their source material from the Chaturdash Vidyasthan and the arts from the 64 kalas. But this would also not be a completely correct way of representing things, as you will see when we move on. There are certain things which we would categorize as arts which come from the Chaturdash Vidyasthan, and also some things which we would think of as science, such as metallurgy, or we would think of it as technology, mining, metallurgy, gemology, etc. These were part of the 64 kalas. So remember, that kind of division just did not operate in the time we are thinking of. Look at the screen. What you can see is the Chaturdash Vidyasthan and also some other additions to it. Look at the delineation of these 14 Vidyasthans. You have the 4 Vedas, which you can see. You also have the 4 Up-Vedas, which you can see. Then you have the 6 Vedangas. Vedangas which included phonetics, grammar, etymology, Jyotish. These were the sources of a lot of mathematics, astronomy, and geometry. For instance, look at Kalp. Kalp had both Sulb and Shrot Sutras in it, which were used for making Yajnavedis. Now, these Sulb and Shrot Sutras are storehouses of mathematics and geometry and astronomy. Now, the Jyotish Vedang is also a storehouse both of astronomy and of mathematics. When we go to the section on science and mathematics, we will look at it in some greater detail, but you can see a schematic representation over here. Now, can you see that 4 more Vidyasthans have been added? When you add these 4 Vidyasthans, the picture becomes even more comprehensive. Now, I am not saying that each and every Shastra is included in these 18 Vidyasthans, because it's not. But most of them will find their sources or some related material in these Vidyasthans. Look very carefully at Itihas and Puran. You know what Itihas is. Look at these 2 pictures. And now you know Itihas is the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And the Purans are 18 in number according to some people, but the count of the Purans differs widely amongst different authorities. There is also supposed to be a kind of source book of all the Purans, which was perhaps composed at the same time as the Vedatrayi themselves. Apart from the Itihas Puran and all the Vidyasthans that I have spoken about, there is one category which I must mention over here, which is a little different, which is unique. It's mentioned in the Rig Veda. It's called the Gatha Narshamsi. Now, the Itihas and the Puran are about deities. They are about Sri Ram, Sri Krishna, Shivji, Vishnuji, Devi, Lakshmiji. They are not about mortals. But the Gatha Narshamsi was about ordinary people. And there is a strange relation, perhaps a relation which needs to be researched between this and that other great story compendium, story complex of ancient India, which is called the Badkaha, written in Prakrit, now lost, but of which Sanskrit, Tamil, Marathi versions exist, like the Katha Sarit Sagar, the Vasudev Hindi, the Perun Kottai, all these exist. So, it's a matter for greater research. Can all these derive their source from the Gatha Narshamsi? So this was a brief description, a really brief description, which tried to give you an overview of language as well as literature of that period. And the idea of looking at the 14 plus 4, 18 Vidyasthans and the 64 arts is to show the categorization of knowledge systems. I will end this section with this shlok from the Arthashastra. The Arthashastra starts with a description of the kind of knowledge that the cultured and knowledgeable person must have. So this is the shlok, and you will notice in this shlok also that Kautilya talks of Ved, Vedang, Anvishaki, philosophy. In actual fact, the same things which are there in the Chaturdash Vidyasthan, just written off and spoken of in a slightly different way. So this was the seat of learning. This was the origin from where all knowledge sprang and the way in which all knowledge was organized. After looking at language and literature, we will now go on to the fine arts.